The sun was beginning to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The local shooting range sat at the edge of town, a place where men came to test their skills, compare weapons, and laugh loudly with each other. On weekends, it was always crowded, full of energy and noise. People came with polished rifles, expensive scopes, and brand-new equipment. They came to show off as much as to practice. That evening, though, someone very different arrived. Amara. Johnson walked slowly up the gravel path, her steps calm but steady. She was dressed in a simple brown jacket and worn-out jeans. Her shoes looked old, the kind you wear when you don't care about appearances. In her hand, she carried a faded duffel bag that had clearly seen better days, compared to the shiny cases others carried. Hers looked almost embarrassing, as if it had been forgotten in an attic for years. She pushed open the gate and entered. Heads turned almost immediately. Most of the people at the range were men, and most of them looked like they belonged there. Some wore camouflage jackets, others had tactical gear. A few had ear protectors hanging around their necks like trophies. They glanced at her and then exchanged looks with one another. The whispers started quickly, rising like a quiet wave. "Look at that," someone muttered with a chuckle. "Did she get lost?" another said, shaking his head. "She doesn't even look like she knows how to load a gun," a third voice laughed. Amara heard them, but she didn't react. She kept her eyes straight ahead, her face calm, almost unreadable. Her skin glowed softly under the evening light, and though her features were simple, there was something strong and unshaken in the way she held herself. She didn't walk too fast or too slow. She walked like someone who knew her destination and had no reason to rush. When she reached an empty lane, she set down her duffel bag. The bag made a soft thud on the wooden bench, drawing more stares. People were curious now. They leaned slightly, pretending not to watch, but their eyes followed her carefully. Amara unzipped the bag, her fingers moving slowly. She pulled out an old rifle, one that looked nothing like the modern weapons the others proudly displayed. Its wooden stock was scratched, the metal dark with age. It wasn't beautiful or shiny, it was plain, almost dull. To the others, it looked like something that belonged in a museum, not on a firing line. The whispers grew louder. "Is she serious?" One man laughed. "That thing probably doesn't even shoot straight." "She must be a beginner. Look at her hands." Indeed, her hands trembled slightly as she placed the rifle on the table. Her fingers were slim, her nails short and clean. There was no sign of toughness, no roughness that came from years of training. To the onlookers, she looked nervous, almost clumsy. Some of them began to smile in amusement, as if they were watching a show. But Amara wasn't looking at them. She was focused only on the rifle in front of her. Slowly, she ran her hand across the wooden surface, as though greeting an old friend. Her eyes softened for a moment, memories flickering in her mind, late nights on the porch with her father, the quiet click of a scope, the sharp sound of a shot echoing in the dark. She remembered his patient voice, teaching her how to breathe, how to steady her arms, how to let her heart beat slow before pulling the trigger. To her, this rifle wasn't just a weapon. It was history. It was connection. It was home. Around her, the noise of the range filled the air, gunshots cracking, laughter echoing, brass shells clinking against the ground. But inside her mind, there was silence. A deep, calming silence. She always felt when she held this rifle. She adjusted the stand and lifted the weapon. For a moment, the people around her saw her hands tremble again, and they chuckled quietly. One man even nudged his friend, whispering, "Watch this, she won't even hit the paper." But Amara didn't hear him. She pressed the rifle to her shoulder, her posture suddenly changing. The same woman who moments ago looked awkward and out of place now appeared steady and composed. Her back straightened, her elbows tucked in. Her breathing slowed. She looked down the sight, her eyes sharp and focused. The laughter around her softened, almost uncertain now. Something about the way she aimed was different. It wasn't the aim of a beginner fumbling with a heavy rifle. It was precise, practiced, and controlled. Her body language had shifted in a way few noticed at first, but now it was impossible to ignore. Even the range master, a gruff man who had seen countless shooters over the years, paused to watch her. His eyebrows lifted slightly as though he sensed something others didn't. Amara's finger rested gently on the trigger. She didn't pull yet. She let herself breathe, slowly in, slowly out. She remembered her father's words. The shot is not about the gun. It's about the mind. When the mind is steady, the bullet knows where to go. The whispers around her faded into the background. For Amara, there was no one else in the world at that moment. No laughter, no doubt, no eyes judging her. There was only her, the rifle, and the distant target waiting silently at the end of the lane. She closed her eyes for a brief second, then opened them again. The evening light caught her face, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of quiet, strength in her eyes, her finger pressed gently, and with that, the first shot echoed through the range. The sound of Amara's first shot echoed across the shooting range. For a brief second, the laughter and chatter faded into silence. A thin trail of smoke rose from the barrel of her old rifle. The target, far down the lane, now carried a fresh hole near the center. Nobody expected that. The men who had mocked her a moment ago leaned forward, squinting to see more clearly. "Probably luck," one of them muttered, trying to brush it off. Another man smirked. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day," he said, his voice loud enough for others to hear. The mocking returned, softer, but still sharp. The range was full of confident people, and none of them wanted to admit that a quiet, simple-looking woman had made a better shot than many of them could. Amara didn't look their way. She did not smile, nor did she seem surprised by the neat hole her bullet had made. Instead, she calmly reloaded her rifle, her movements slow and steady. Her hands still trembled slightly as she worked, and the men noticed it. They laughed again. "See that? She's nervous. That first shot was just luck. She won't do it again. She probably doesn't even know what she's doing." Their voices floated in the air like buzzing flies, irritating but unavoidable. Amara heard every word, though she kept her eyes lowered, focused only on the weapon in front of her. She had learned long ago that answering mockery with words never changed anything. Silence was her armor. Inside, however, her heart was not silent. She felt a sharp sting, a memory of being underestimated so many times before. In classrooms, in jobs, even walking down the street, people always looked at her and assumed she was less. Too simple, too quiet, too ordinary. She remembered the voices from her past, echoing like the ones now. "You can't do it. You're not enough." But her father's voice also lived in her heart, stronger than the others. "Let them laugh, Amara. The bullet does not care who pulls the trigger. It only follows the truth of your aim." She lifted the rifle again. The mocking continued. A few men had even stopped shooting their own targets just to watch her, certain they were about to see her fail. One man crossed his arms and said, "She'll miss the whole paper this time." Another chuckled, already shaking his head in amusement. Amara pressed the stock against her shoulder. Her breathing slowed again. She blocked out their voices, forcing herself to focus on the silence between her heartbeats. She had practiced this for years, though nobody here would ever know. Her finger pressed gently on the trigger. The second shot rang out, sharp and clear. This time, the bullet struck the target even closer to the bullseye. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. The laughter stopped. Even the men who had mocked her grew quiet, their smirks fading. For a moment, nobody said a word. The hole in the paper spoke louder than anything else. Amara lowered her rifle and reloaded again, her face calm. She did not look at them. She did not need to. But the silence did not last long. Pride is a stubborn thing, and some of the men could not accept what they were seeing. "That doesn't mean anything," one of them finally said, his tone defensive. "Anyone can get lucky twice." "Yeah," another added quickly. "The target's not even that far. Try something harder." "It's just a fluke," someone muttered, though his voice carried little confidence now. The words felt weaker than before, but they still floated around her like smoke. They wanted to drag her down, to make her doubt herself. Amara's eyes remained on the target. She thought about the years when she had trained in secret, long nights when the world was asleep and only the stars watched her. Her father had sat beside her then, his calm voice guiding her as she practiced again and again. He had told her she was special, that her patience and focus would carry her farther than others could imagine. But she had never told anyone about those nights. To the world, she was just a simple woman with nothing remarkable about her. Until now. She lifted the rifle once more. This time, as she aimed, the crowd grew tense. They no longer laughed as freely. Some of them even leaned forward. Waiting, she fired again. Another shot. Another perfect hole, almost touching the first two. The whispers returned, but now they were different. Confused, surprised, uneasy. "That's impossible. Nobody shoots like that with an old rifle." "Who is she?" Amara lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands still shook a little, but her eyes were steady. She placed the rifle carefully on the stand and paused, letting her breath even out. The world around her buzzed with disbelief, but she stayed quiet, as if none of it mattered, and in truth, it didn't. For her, the shooting range was not a stage to impress others. It was not about proving them wrong. It was about honoring the years of quiet practice, the memory of her father, and the belief that even a simple woman carried a strength the world could not see. The mockery still lingered in the air, but it had lost its sharpness. Laughter had turned into uneasy silence, and silence was beginning to turn into reluctant respect. But Amara paid no attention. She adjusted her rifle again, preparing for the next shot, and this time the people around her leaned in closer, not to laugh, but to see the truth they could no longer deny. The shooting range had grown unusually quiet. The same men who once laughed now watched closely, their eyes fixed on Amara. They had expected a beginner's failure, a clumsy mistake, a target full of scattered holes. Instead, they were seeing something they could not explain, precision that belonged to professionals, not to someone who looked so ordinary. Amara did not notice their confusion. She had long ago learned to turn her ears away from the noise of the world. All she heard now was her breathing, the faint rustle of wind, and the steady rhythm of her heart. Her father had always told her, "One shot means nothing. True skill is in rhythm. If your focus breaks after the first success, then it was never real." So she steadied herself once more. She reloaded, her hands calm now, her fingers finding the familiar movements with ease. The tremble that once revealed her nerves was beginning to fade. Every step of her preparation was slow, careful, and exact, like a ritual she had repeated countless times before. The other shooters at the range pretended to return to their own practice, but their attention was still on her. They wanted to see if the first two shots were just chance. They wanted proof that luck had carried her this far. Amara lifted the rifle. Her body aligned naturally, as if she had been built for this. The wooden stock pressed gently into her shoulder, and the scope framed the target. Far down the lane, the bullseye waited, small, distant, but clear to her eyes. She let her lungs fill with air, then slowly released it. Her heartbeat slowed, her focus narrowed. The world shrank into a tunnel that held only her, the rifle, and the mark she aimed for. Her finger brushed the trigger. She waited. She breathed again. She pressed. The shot cracked through the air. Downrange, another hole appeared, so close to the others that it almost touched them. The grouping was perfect, tight, controlled, precise. This time, the crowd could not deny it. A few murmurs spread. Quickly. "That's impossible," one man whispered. Another rubbed his eyes, as though checking if he was seeing clearly. Even the range master leaned forward, his lips pressing into a firm line. But Amara didn't pause to acknowledge them. She was already reloading, already slipping into the rhythm her father had taught her long ago. Her shots followed one after another, each one steady, each one true. The sound of her rifle became a steady beat, like a drum marking time. With every crack, the grouping on the paper grew tighter. It was no longer just accuracy, it was artistry. Her movements carried a quiet grace, something almost beautiful in its simplicity. She wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't shout or celebrate after each hit. She simply aimed, breathed, and fired. Each shot carried the weight of practice, patience, and quiet discipline. Memories flowed through her mind as she continued. She remembered the nights when she was younger, standing in the open fields behind her father's house. The moonlight would guide them as they lined up makeshift targets, empty cans, bottles, or scraps of wood. Her father would sit beside her, correcting her stance, showing her how to align the sight. "Don't rush," he would say softly. "The world wants speed, but true skill lives in patience." Those words echoed now with every shot she released. The men who had mocked her before no longer laughed. They no longer spoke at all. Some of them lowered their own rifles, unable to pretend they were still practicing. Others stood frozen, their eyes locked on the remarkable sight unfolding in front. Of them, Amara's rhythm continued, shot after shot, bullet after bullet. Each one landed exactly where she wanted it to until the center of the target was torn into a small cluster. The paper looked less like a practice sheet and more like evidence of mastery. For Amara, this was not about impressing anyone. She had lived too many years being unseen to care about recognition now. The shooting was her way of remembering her father, of keeping alive the lessons he had given her. She fired not for the men who mocked her, but for the little girl who once stood in the fields, unsure if she would ever be enough. And yet, without meaning to, she had captured the attention of everyone around her. One man finally broke the silence. "She's not just good," he said in a low voice. "She's something else." His tone carried no laughter this time, only awe. The range master's eyes narrowed. He had seen skilled shooters before, people who had trained for years in the military or in competition. But the way this woman shot, calm, unshaken, precise beyond reason, it was something different. It was as if her rifle was an extension of her own body. Amara fired again. The sharp crack echoed, and the grouping tightened even further. By now, the center of the target was destroyed, shredded by her unbroken accuracy. Still, she continued, her rhythm unbroken, her breathing steady. Time seemed to stretch. The sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the range. Dust floated, gently in the air, caught in the glow as Amara kept firing. She had become a figure of focus, her presence pulling every eye, her quiet strength silencing every tongue. At last, she lowered the rifle. The chamber was empty, and the duffel bag held no more rounds. She placed the weapon carefully on the stand and let out a long breath, her body relaxing. The silence was heavy now, not mocking, not doubtful, but reverent. The same people who had laughed at her entrance now stood still, their pride broken by the undeniable truth they had witnessed. Amara did not look at them. She did not need to. She knew what she had done. She knew what the target would reveal. Her father's words returned once more. "The world will doubt you, Amara, but the bullet tells the truth," and tonight the truth was clear. The shooting range was filled with a strange silence. The loud laughter and sharp comments that had once floated in the air were gone. In their place, There was only the sound of the wind brushing across the open lanes, the soft creak of wooden benches, and the faint smell of gunpowder lingering around. Amara stood quietly beside her bench. Her rifle rested gently on the stand, the barrel cooling after its steady rhythm of shots. The target downrange was no longer a clean sheet of paper. The center was torn, shredded into a cluster of holes so tight it looked as if a single bullet had struck the same spot again and again. The crowd of men who had mocked her earlier now stood in awkward silence. Some looked down at their feet. Others stared at her target, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few whispered to each other, voices low as though speaking too loudly would disturb the moment. "That's not normal," one man muttered. "I've never seen grouping like that," another replied. "Who is she?" someone else whispered. The words floated softly through the air. They were not meant for her to hear, but the whispers carried anyway. The range master himself, an older man with a stern face, rubbed his chin slowly as he looked at the target. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with a kind of wonder. Amara remained still. She did not gloat, did not smile, did not turn to face the stares. She had never been one to seek attention. To her, the rifle was not about performance or pride. It was about discipline, patience, and memory. She thought of her father again. She could almost see him in her mind, sitting on the porch at night, leaning back in his old chair, watching her practice in the fields. His voice echoed softly. "When the shot is perfect, you will not need to announce it. The target will speak for you, and when people see it, they will whisper." The whispers had come true. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. They had arrived that evening full of confidence, their gear polished and their voices loud. But now, their laughter had turned into silence, and their certainty had been replaced with doubt. One man, younger than the rest, leaned closer to his friend and whispered, "I heard about people like this. Sharpshooters, the kind they train in the army." His voice was filled with both fear and admiration. "Don't be ridiculous," the friend replied quickly, though even he sounded unsure. "She's just lucky. That's all." But deep down, they all knew it wasn't luck. Amara reached for the rifle again. The simple action made several of them draw a breath, as if they were about to see another miracle. She adjusted the strap and checked the chamber, though she knew she had fired the last round. She was not planning to shoot again. Instead, she cleaned the rifle carefully, wiping it with a soft cloth she kept folded in her duffel bag. The way she moved was quiet, gentle, and respectful, like someone handling something more than just metal and wood. It was as though the rifle carried a spirit, a story, and she honored it with her care. The range master slowly stepped forward. His boots crunched against the gravel, and the sound drew everyone's attention. He did not speak. Right away, he walked to the lane, lifted a spotting scope, and studied the torn target carefully. His jaw tightened, and when he lowered the scope, there was something in his eyes that no one else had seen before. Recognition. He cleared his throat. "That," he said slowly, pointing at the target, "is sniper-level shooting." The words carried across the range like a bell. Gasps followed. The men who had mocked her shifted again, their pride shrinking further. Some of them avoided her eyes. Others glanced at her with a mix of respect and unease. They all knew the truth now, though they would not admit it aloud. They had laughed at someone who was far beyond their reach. Amara, however, showed no reaction. She simply placed the cloth back in her bag, folded neatly, and set her rifle down beside it. Her face remained calm, her expression steady. For her, this was not about being called a sniper. It was not about the label or the whispers. It was about the years of quiet practice, the long nights under the stars, the lessons from her father that had shaped her life. Still, the whispers grew. "She's better than anyone I've seen. She could compete." maybe even win. No, she could teach us. The voices carried more respect now, but they still did not reach her. Amara stood apart from them, her silence a shield. She had always been overlooked, underestimated, judged by appearances. And now, even with proof before their eyes, she did not need their approval. She remembered the first time she ever hit a bullseye as a child. Her father had smiled, not with surprise, but with certainty. "I knew you could do it," he had said, "because patience runs in your blood. You will be greater than you know." Those words wrapped around her now like a quiet comfort. The whispers around her continued, but Amara's heart was elsewhere. She thought of her father, gone now, but alive in every shot she fired. She thought of the little girl who had once doubted herself, who had once been afraid of failing. That little girl was gone, replaced by the woman who stood tall and silent, her skill undeniable. At the far end of the lane, the target still swayed gently in the breeze, torn by perfect precision. It was the only voice she needed, and in that silence, the truth settled in. The simple woman they had mocked was not simple at all. She was something far greater, someone who carried the kind of skill that did not shout, but whispered, and everyone who saw it would never forget. The sun had sunk lower, leaving the shooting range bathed in a golden light. Shadows stretched long across the gravel, and the cool evening breeze carried with it the fading smell of smoke and gunpowder. Amara stood quietly by her bench, her rifle resting on the stand. She was done shooting for now. Around her, the men who once filled the range with loud voices and laughter had grown strangely quiet. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a heavy silence. It was a silence that spoke louder than their mockery ever had. Some of them glanced at each other, uncertain of what to say. A few shifted uncomfortably, pretending to adjust their rifles, though they hadn't fired in several minutes. Others stared at the target Amara had left behind, unable to take their eyes away from the torn cluster at the center. The same mouths that had laughed at her now struggled to form words. The same eyes that had dismissed her now followed her every move. Amara did not turn toward them. She did not wait for recognition or apology. She had not come for them, and she did not need them. Her focus remained steady, her expression calm. She carefully began to pack away her things, folding her cloth, cleaning her rifle with slow care, and placing each piece back into her worn duffel bag. But the silence remained. It pressed down on the men, heavier than the weight of their weapons. The pride they had carried so easily earlier now felt small in their hands. They had laughed at her, certain she would stumble, certain she would fail. Instead, they had been witnesses to something extraordinary, something they could not explain away. One man finally tried. His voice was low, uncertain. Maybe she just had a good day." The words fell flat. No one answered him. The truth was too clear. Another man let out a short breath, almost like a sigh. He shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered. "That's not luck. That's skill. Real skill." The others said nothing. They knew he was right. Even the range master, who had seen countless shooters over the years, remained unusually quiet. His sharp eyes had studied her every movement, every shot, and he knew what he had witnessed. He had seen trained marksmen, soldiers, and competitors. But this woman had shown something rare, something that could not be faked. Still, Amara did not notice their silence. Or perhaps she noticed it, but chose not to let it touch her. She had lived her whole life in the shadow of underestimation. This moment was no different. She moved slowly, calmly, as if she were the only person on the range. Her thoughts drifted again to her father. She remembered the evenings when they would sit together after practice, the stars glowing above them. He would tell her, "People will doubt you because they do not understand you. But when you stand in silence, your truth will be louder than any word they can speak." Those words wrapped around her now, a quiet comfort in the golden hour. The silence at the range was no longer just awkward, it was heavy with realization. The men who had mocked her now faced themselves. They had judged her by her simple clothes, her old rifle, her quiet presence. They had mistaken humility for weakness, and now they could not undo the shame that came with their laughter. One of the younger men, his pride wounded more deeply than the others, finally broke the silence. "All right," he muttered, "so she's good, but it doesn't mean she's better than everyone." His voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. No one agreed with him. The silence that followed swallowed his words whole. Amara zipped up her duffel bag. She lifted it with care, placing the strap over her shoulder. She stood for a moment, looking down the lane at her target one last time. It swayed gently in the evening breeze, the center shredded into proof that no one could deny. She allowed herself a small breath, nothing more. No smile, no gesture, just a quiet exhale. Then she turned away from the lane. Her steps were steady, calm, the same as when she had arrived. But the range felt different now. People moved aside without realizing it, giving her space as she passed. No one dared to laugh. No one dared to speak. The silence followed her like a shadow. For Amara, the silence was not victory. It was simply truth. She did not need applause or praise. She did not even need their respect. All she needed was the knowledge that she had honored her father's lessons, that she had carried forward the patience and discipline he had given her. But for the others, the silence was a mirror. It reflected their pride, their prejudice, their arrogance. It showed them the emptiness of their laughter, the weakness in their judgment. Some of them would remember this day for years, not because they had seen a great shooter, but because they had learned something about themselves. As Amara walked toward the gate, the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with the last colors of the day. Her figure was outlined against the light, quiet and strong. She carried no trophies, no medals, no recognition, but she carried something far greater: truth. And behind her, the range remained still, the silence unbroken. The evening air grew cooler as the sun sank lower, leaving the range in soft golden light. The world outside the gates moved on, cars passing in the distance, birds flying overhead. But inside the shooting range, time seemed to slow. Everyone's attention remained on the simple woman who had turned their laughter into silence. Amara stood with her old duffel bag resting against her shoulder, ready to leave. Yet before she could take her first step toward the exit, "The range," Master called out. His voice was deep, steady, and carried the authority of a man who had seen many shooters in his life. "Wait," he said. The word cut through the silence, making several heads turn. Even Amara paused, her hand tightening slightly on the strap of her bag. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. The range master walked forward, his boots heavy against the gravel. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp with curiosity. He stopped near her lane, glancing once at the target still swaying in the breeze. Then he looked back at Amara. "Who taught you to shoot like that?" he asked. The men nearby leaned in, eager for her answer. They expected her to boast, to reveal some secret background, perhaps years of military training or a career in competitions. They wanted something that made sense, something that explained what they had just seen. Amara's gaze lowered for a moment, her fingers brushing the edge of her bag. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "No one you'd know," she said. The simplicity of her answer surprised them. Some frowned, expecting more. But her tone left no room for questions. She had spoken her truth, and that was all she chose to share. The range master studied her carefully, as if weighing the weight of her words. He nodded slowly, a small gesture of respect, then stepped back. Whispers broke out again, this time softer, filled with wonder. "She's hiding something. No beginner shoots like that. Could she be Military? Or maybe a champion we don't know about? The questions circled, but no answers came. Amara lifted her duffel bag once more. She began to walk toward the exit, her steps calm and even. As she moved, the silence parted for her. Men who had mocked her earlier now stepped aside without being told, their eyes lowering as she passed. The revelation was not spoken aloud, but it hung in the air for all to feel. This woman was not ordinary. She carried a skill that few in the world possessed, a gift that came not from noise or pride, but from patience, discipline, and years of quiet practice. For some of the men, this realization burned deeply. They had spent years polishing their rifles, boasting of their skills, laughing at others. Yet here was a woman with a worn-out rifle and a quiet face who had surpassed them without effort. For others, the revelation brought respect. They saw in her something rare, something they could admire even if they could never understand it. Amara, however, thought nothing of these things. She did not measure herself by their whispers or their silence. Her revelation was different. It was inside her. As she stepped closer to the gate, memories returned to her again. She remembered her father's words on the night he had first handed her the rifle. "This is not a weapon, Amara. It is a truth-teller. When you hold it, the world will know who you are. You won't need to explain yourself. The target will explain for you." That evening at the range, the target had spoken. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt a quiet satisfaction, not pride, but peace. She had not only honored her father's lessons, but she had proven something to herself. All the doubts she once carried, all the times she had been told she wasn't enough, faded like smoke in the evening air. The range gate creaked as she pushed it open. Beyond it, the world stretched wide, bathed in the fading light of sunset. She could hear faint voices behind her, still whispering, still wondering, but she did not look back. The revelation for her was simple. She did not need their approval. She did not need their applause. She had found her strength, and it was hers, alone. Behind her, the men remained frozen in thought. Some stared at the shredded target, others at the empty lane where she had stood. They felt the weight of what they had seen, and though their pride resisted, they knew they would never forget this evening. The range master, standing at the center, folded his arms across his chest. His eyes lingered on the gate where Amara had disappeared. Finally he spoke, his voice low but certain. "That woman," he said, "is the best shooter I've ever seen." The words fell heavy in the air. None of the men argued. None of them laughed, because they all knew the truth. The simple woman they had mocked carried within her the skill of a master, a skill that could not be denied. And though Amara had walked away, her presence remained. The revelation was complete. The sky was painted with shades of purple and orange as the last light of day slowly faded. Amara stepped onto the quiet street outside the shooting range, her old duffel bag still resting on her shoulder. The evening breeze brushed against her face, cool and calming, carrying away the heavy noise of the day. Inside the gates, the crowd remained behind, whispering and replaying every shot she had taken. Their disbelief, their silence, their change of heart. It all stayed locked inside those walls. Amara, however, did not turn back to see it. She walked forward, steady and unshaken, as if her soul had already chosen peace over recognition. Her shoes crunched softly against the gravel road. Each step was a reminder of how far she had come, not just from the range, but through life itself. People had always underestimated her, sometimes for her appearance, sometimes for her quiet nature, sometimes for no reason at all. But that evening, with every shot, she had reminded herself that her worth was never in their eyes. It was in her own hands, her own heart, and the lessons left behind by her father. As she walked further, she remembered those lessons more clearly than ever. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind, soft but strong. Control your breath, steady your hand, and never rush. Shooting is not about showing power, it's about showing truth. She smiled faintly at the memory. That truth had revealed itself tonight. Not in the words of others, but in the silence that followed her shots. That silence spoke louder than any applause ever could. Amara reached a small bench near the bus stop and placed her duffel bag beside her. She sat quietly, staring at the horizon as the last rays of the sun dipped below. The world moved on around her. Cars passing, a child laughing with his mother, a street vendor closing his stall. To them, she was just another woman sitting by the road. None of them knew that inside the range, moments ago, she had stunned a crowd into silence, and that thought comforted her. She did not need the world to know. She only needed to keep carrying the strength within her. Back at the range, however, the story of what had happened was already growing into something bigger. Men who once laughed now sat quietly, replaying the sound of her shots in their minds. Some looked at their own targets and felt a sting of shame. Others felt inspired, wondering how many hours of practice, how much patience it would take to reach even half of her skill. The range master remained still for a long time after Amara's departure. His years of experience told him one thing clearly. He had just witnessed greatness. But he also knew that greatness often chose to remain hidden. He respected that choice. Meanwhile, Amara rose again from the bench when the bus finally arrived. She stepped inside, carrying her old bag, and chose a quiet seat by the window. As the bus rolled forward, she leaned her head gently against the glass, watching the city lights flicker to life in the distance. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief. The weight she had carried, the laughter, the doubt, the eyes judging her, was gone now. She felt lighter, freer, as though she had left all of it behind with the broken targets on the range. A child sitting across from her stared curiously at the long bag resting at her feet. His mother whispered something to him and pulled him closer, but the boy kept watching. Amara noticed his gaze and gave him the gentlest smile. The boy smiled back shyly before turning away. That small exchange reminded her of something important. Strength was not always shown with noise or recognition. Sometimes true strength was silent, hidden in actions, revealed only to those who paid attention. As the bus carried her deeper into the city, Amara's thoughts drifted toward the future. She wondered if she would ever return to that range again, or if tonight was enough. She wondered if those men would remember her not as the woman they mocked, but as the lesson they learned. Whatever they remembered did not matter much to her. What mattered was that she had faced their doubt without anger, without argument. She had let her actions speak, and those actions had told the truth. The bus slowed at her stop. She picked up her bag and stepped out into the quiet neighborhood, where she lived. The streets here were lined with small houses, each window glowing with warm yellow light. Families laughed inside, the sounds drifting gently into the night. She walked slowly toward her home, her footsteps soft on the familiar path. When she reached her front door, she paused for a moment, looking up at the darkening sky. A single star twinkled faintly above, reminding her again of her father's words. "When you hold the rifle, the world will know who you are. You won't need to explain yourself." Amara whispered softly into the night. "You were right, Papa." With that, she opened the door and stepped inside. That night, while the city outside continued to move, Amara sat quietly at her small table, cleaning her rifle. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, almost lovingly. Each part of the weapon carried memories. Each mark on the metal told a story of hours spent in silence, perfecting her skill. She knew tomorrow she would wake up and return to her simple life. She would walk the streets as she always did, unnoticed, ordinary in the eyes of strangers. But deep within her, she carried something extraordinary, something no laughter could erase, no doubt could destroy. Amara smiled softly to herself. She didn't need fame. She didn't need a title. She had her peace, her truth, and her father's legacy living within her. And as she set the rifle aside and prepared for rest, she knew one thing for certain. The world might always see her as a simple woman, but she would always know she was far more than they could ever imagine.